24 hours ago, I had a completely different show planned for you today. Then life reminded me again that plans are just suggestions. This is the Reinvention Room, and I'm Diana Staley, and today you're getting the unfiltered version. I'm going to talk about the pivot moment that each of us experiences in life. It is when we think we had a plan, and then suddenly something happens, and those plans literally fall apart right in front of our eyes. So, today we are going to pivot from our original show scheduled, and I want to let you know what happened. I had a guest scheduled today, and in less than 24 hours before we were set to record, life happened and there was a shift in plans. I had the wonderful Michael Elley scheduled for our show this week, and something unexpected happened and we needed to reschedule. We just never know when life will throw us that curveball and it shifts everything around you. I want to take a moment to speak about Michael Elley because he has quite an amazing background. He shared the screen with the king of rock and roll himself, appearing alongside Elvis Presley in the Paramount film Easy Come, Easy Go. He also appeared with Charlton Heston in Paramount's movie The Savage, and then with Brian Keith in Disney's show called Those Callaways. The music never stopped for Michael after Hollywood. He is a gifted singer, songwriter, musician, and producer. Today, Michael Elley serves as president and CEO of Ultimate Earth Inc., an environmentally focused biotechnology and manufacturing company based in Nashville, Tennessee. His ongoing mission to make a difference for the planet and its people. And he's far from finished creatively either, with his newest venture, Light Waves Musical, brings his signature music to the stage in an ambitious new theatrical project, proving that a career that began beside Elvis is still writing new chapters. We look forward to welcoming Michael Elley at a later date on our show. Let's go back to the pivot. I'm going to take a moment to share my moment with you when that pivot hit me. It was only a couple of days ago that I found out that my show was going to shift for this week. My first instinct was to panic, and for a second, there was that moment where I did actually panic, just for a moment. Last week, I had technical issues in the recording studio, and now this week, I had a slot to fill and to get another guest last minute. Well, that was not an option. We plan quite a bit before people come on the show, and I just didn't want to throw somebody in there. So instead, we're going to talk about this pivot moment for everybody and talk about how we can improve things when something like this happens and move in the right direction. So instead of forcing a fix, I'm doing the thing I ask my clients and people I know to do, and I do this all the time, and that is to show up anyways and pivot with the change the universe just threw at us. Why do plans fall apart? Let's talk about planning for a minute. I've spent over 25 years plus doing project management in IT and commercial construction projects. I'm specialized in project rescue work, everything from government programs to healthcare systems to the power industry and Fortune 500 companies. And if there's one myth that I have watched wreck more plans, more careers, and more good people than anything else, it's this: the myth that a good enough plan prevents disruption. It doesn't. It never has. I have sat in the rooms with executives who've had beautiful plans, color coded timelines, contingency budgets, steering committees, and I watched those plans fall apart anyway. Not because anyone did anything wrong, but because reality doesn't actually care how good your plan is. Here's the distinction I want you to sit with for a moment. There's a difference between a plan failing and a plan simply ending. A failure implies someone screwed up, that there was a mistake, a gap, something you should have seen coming. But most of the time, that's not what actually is happening. Most of the time, the plan just ends. It reaches the end of its usefulness because the conditions around it changed, and something new has to take its place. That's not failure. That's just what happens when you're operating in the real world instead of a spreadsheet. Let me give you a real example. I was brought on to an IT project to implement paper records to an electronic record system. The project was already behind, and they were having many issues across the whole project. It was already months behind before I even walked in the door. Everyone in the room could point to the plan. The plan seemed fine. The plan was definitely thorough, but there were also issues with the vendor supplying the software. And it wasn't just the software, it was the company. Only after being there a couple of weeks, the vendor announced they were going bankrupt. Nobody predicted that. Nobody could have. And here's the part that matters: the fix wasn't a better version of the old plan, it was a completely different plan, built fast, built for the moment we were actually in, not the moment we originally planned for. That's project rescue work in one sentence, not defending the old plan, but building the next new one quickly without pretending the first one failed you. And it's not just in the corporate world, it happens in our personal lives as well. We could have planned the best vacation for our family, and last minute, as you are all packed and ready to go, and you get that phone call that cancels the whole vacation in a split second. It could have been the weather, flights get canceled, or even a family emergency. We just never know what the universe is going to bring us. So, this doesn't happen all of the time, thank goodness. And I'm very thankful for that. But in a world that's changing at lightning speed, we are going to experience more of this as we move through the future. Let's talk about what we actually do with it. When people hear the word reinvention, they picture the big leap, quitting the job, moving cities, writing the book that changes everything. But most reinvention doesn't look like that. Most of it's small and quiet, and nobody claps for it. And this week, mine looked like this. Basically, I had someone scheduled for my show this week, and unfortunately, we needed to reschedule. And so I had to pivot quickly and make some changes and come out with this video for you to share something with the audience. And so I wanted to show up and actually put a video out, even though our special guest could not make it. And that's it. It's not glamorous. Nobody's writing a headline about it, but it's still reinvention. It's still choosing to rebuild the plan in real time instead of freezing. And I have to say that when I was younger, I remember looking back at things, and many times when I would have that fear come in, when things would start to collapse, the first thing I would want to do is freeze and not do anything at all. And I realized that in the long run, that was not the best choice. And so now, at least looking at things moving forward, I can actually make the right choice and move forward without having those feelings rush in of, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? As a young adult, I would start to panic and feel overwhelmed when a shift would start happening in my life. This was especially true if it felt like something was failing, whether that was my job, my finances, or a relationship with someone. Rather than deal with what was going on, I would ignore it. I would avoid that issue, whatever it was. I would ignore it until it was the elephant in the room. I remember how my head would swim and ideas of how to fix it would go round and round. I was so afraid of failing or making the wrong decision, I would just not do anything and let it implode. How many of you out there ever had that issue where fear stopped you from moving forward? Fear can stop us from moving forward. And once we realize that we are going to make mistakes, that we are not perfect, that the world is not going to end, life becomes easier and much less stressful. I wrote the book, The Courage to Start Over, after one of my biggest downward spirals. It started with an unexpected storm coming in that flooded my basement, and this literally started a chain reaction of events that was like dominoes falling one by one. And it seemed to keep going and going until it finally stopped one day. I thought to myself, there were some things that happened that I had no control over, and others I probably should have seen coming. And what I learned from this is that life will bring us challenges, but it is how we roll with those challenges that makes the difference. There are certain things we can fix before they become so big that there is no turning back from them. And then we have surprises that no one saw coming. Here's a pattern I see constantly with my consulting clients, and I bet you'll recognize it in yourself. People wait for permission to rebuild. They wait until the plan has completely collapsed before they let themselves pivot. This is usually where I get the call to fix the problem. Instead of noticing the small cracks early and adjusting them before it reaches the point of no return, people tend to want this thing to happen. They want to wait and see. But the truth is, they could have prevented the fall. Reinvention doesn't have to wait for rock bottom. It can start at the first sign of a crack. As we evolve on this planet, we are moving at a pace we have never seen before. We are moving at lightning speed with the development of AI and advanced technologies. It is changing the map for how we work and how everything moves on this planet. This has happened so quickly that people did not have time to really see or grasp the incoming changes. With those changes happening daily in every aspect of our lives, it is difficult to keep up with everything. If you blink, you could miss something. But here we are, and we are all now having to pivot. So let's talk about the pivot protocol and what I actually do. After seeing that pattern over and over, not only in myself, but in other people, waiting until things completely fall apart before we let ourselves pivot, um, I realized that I needed to understand this pattern. And once I could understand this pattern, I realized I needed something more than just awareness of it. I couldn't keep doing the same thing over and over again. I wanted to change that. And so I needed an actual process, something I could reach for in the moment instead of freezing or ignoring something. And especially at work, being a project manager, that is something that is part of our job is to see things ahead of time. And so taking those skills that I had learned in being a project manager and applying them to some of the aspects of my personal life has actually helped me develop all these different protocols that I use, but also helped me to solve many problems for myself in a different way rather than being overwhelmed with something when when something went wrong. So over the years, I built this protocol. I use it in my own life and I use it with clients who entire projects or businesses are unraveling, and I call it the pivot protocol. And I'm sharing it with you today for the first time. There's 4 steps to it. And I may have touched on this in my book a little bit, but really, I'm going to give you all the details here. So, step one, name it without dramatizing it. So, when we have that issue or when a plan falls apart, the first thing most of us do is spin a story about it. And we say, this is a disaster. Everything's ruined. How are we going to fix this? So the first step is separating what actually happened from the story you're tempted to tell yourself about it. Something changed. That's the fact. Everything else is interpretation you're adding on top of the story, right? So we don't want to sit there and, call somebody and then we're telling the story and it's like, oh my gosh, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. So, um, especially like if your basement's flooding. Um, the storm came in, I heard the rain coming down, and then I heard, water rushing downstairs or somewhere in the house. I ran downstairs and there it was. The water was flowing, in through the window into the basement, and there was nothing I could do to stop it because it was the gutter and it was pouring through the window. Um, we can go through that whole thing, but in actuality, what needed to be fixed? How can I get things back to normal? Really looking at those facts and stopping for a moment because, that is a moment that you freeze. When you see water pouring into your basement, then obviously you stand there for a moment and you're like, how can I make this stop? And you have to, realize at some point either I can stop the water or I can't stop the water. So when we go to tell the story, of course, everything's ruined and this happened and there's water all over the place and it's going to rain again. I mean, we go through this whole drama. And so the first thing we need to do is to name the issue. We need to go get, a wet dry back and clean the water up first and then figure out what we need to do about the window. Um, but, of course, we all go through that moment where there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of drama. So once we take that away, that helps, us to solve the problem and kind of get our scruples back and say, okay, now I need to, figure this out. So that is step one. Whenever there's an issue, we want to, look at the facts and stop dramatizing it. So, step two, we have to ask ourselves what is still true about the situation? Even when the path falls apart, the goal underneath it usually doesn't. Ask yourself what part of what I was actually trying to do is still true, even though the way I planned to get there just changed. So, when I ran in that basement and I wanted to see where the water was coming from, and what was I hearing with the water flowing? That was my ultimate goal, was to find out where it was coming from. And then the next step that came in that was not planned was, okay, how am I going to stop it? Can I save the finished basement carpet and walls, the drywall and everything before it reached that area? um, was something new that I had no intention on doing when I went downstairs because I had no idea that it was coming through the window like that. And once I looked out the window and realized that the gutter was pouring into the basement and it was still raining in buckets, there was no way to stop that water. So I had to ask myself, okay, how can I keep, kind of save the space at that moment? And, I identified the issue of where the water was coming from. So that is asking myself, well, what's still true in this case? It's like my goal was to find out where that water was coming from. And, you know, then I had to hurry and put a plan in place, obviously. And moving into step three, we have to choose the smallest next right action. Not the whole new plan, just the next single step. This is the one people skip the most. They try to solve the entire collapse all at once. They get overwhelmed, they freeze, and you don't need to figure the whole thing out and fix it right away. You just need the next move. And in this case, with the water pouring into the basement, obviously, I did talk about that in step two, but it's like after assessing that that water was going to continue pouring in until it stopped raining, my next step was to try and keep the water from going to the carpet. That was like my biggest thing, which There was so much water. That did not happen. And but I still tried to keep it at a certain pace. And once the rain stopped, that's when I decided to put the rest of the plan together. But we can't always put the whole plan together and say, "Oh, I need a vacuum right now," when the water's still running in the window. So there are steps we can take initially to kind of stop the issue, stop the problem from escalating to something worse. And so I really think this is a good example because when you have a window where water's pouring in like that and there's no way to stop it, then you have to quickly pivot and see what you can do to kind of save the space that you're working with. So with this pivot protocol, this is probably the most important step, step 4, where we show up in a new version with a new plan that we wouldn't normally do, and where we have stopped the process of, freezing or ignoring something or thinking that we have to fix it all at one time. The biggest mistake people make in the first 10 minutes after a plan falls apart is trying to fix everything at once. They don't address what broke. They try to solve the entire future in that moment. And they think, what does this mean for the next month, for the relationship, or for the business, or for how people will see me? All at one time. They're thinking all these thoughts, depending on what the situation is. And that's exactly when the freeze sets in. It's when we freeze because we're thinking all these things at one time. And nobody can solve everything all at once in 10 minutes. Nobody. So, just like this show, I had, like I said, technical issues in my first show, and it didn't go up the first day, but that was okay. We got through it, got the show up. It's on all my channels. I'm really happy. And then 24 hours before I was getting ready to do this show, we had a pivot again. And so we have to move with the changes. And the people who move through it well aren't the ones who had the fastest fix. They're the ones who gave themselves permission to not have the whole answer yet. They just asked, what's the next smallest true step that I can make? And that's it. That step actually is the most important one. It's like when you look at something and, when I heard that water pouring into my basement, for example, what was the first step that I had to take? I had to figure out where that water was coming from. And from there, I took another step to figure out if I could get that water to stop. So there's a lot of things that we can look at, but it's really, you know, a simple process if we break it down. If we don't panic, if we don't dramatize it, we can actually sit down and figure out a solution to the issue that we're dealing with. And so these 4 steps are the ones that I use every day. When things happen, we have to break things down and find out what's the next thing I can do that will make the biggest impact to the situation. And most of the time, it's one step and it's a small step. It's not something big that we have to do. And that simplifies things and it also takes away the stress. And that's the best part. I want to stop teaching for a second and just talk to whoever's listening to this right now in the middle of their own version of this, their own pivot, the unexpected moment. And maybe you're somebody that just had a job that ended. You lost your job. Maybe it's a relationship that's shifting under your feet at the moment. Or maybe it's something with your health, your finances, or a business you built that suddenly looks nothing like you thought it would. Whatever it is, I want you to know I see you. Not in a sympathy way, in a I've been exactly where you are way, and I know what you're going through. Here's the one sentence I want you to hold on to today. You don't have to have the whole next chapter of your life figured out. You just have to create the next page. the next step. And it can even be a baby step. You just don't want to freeze and do nothing. There is no reason to panic because there's always a way. That's it. The entire protocol distilled down to one line. Now, here's what I want you to not do in the next 24 to 48 hours. Don't try to solve the whole thing. I said this earlier and I mean it. The freeze happens when we try to fix everything at once, the relationship, the money, the future, all of it right now. You don't have that kind of clarity yet. And that's okay. Nobody does this early. When something happens, it's very hard to be like clear on what the next step is. And so stepping back and slowing down is one of the things that's important to do. And this is so true when we have just experienced something that's shocking, traumatic, or hard to believe. Our mind is not working at full capacity, and trying to move too fast too soon can take you off course completely. So give yourself permission to just handle the next smallest true step and then let the rest wait. And don't isolate. That was my pattern for years. When something started cracking, I'd go quiet. I'd let it become the elephant in the room instead of saying it out loud to a single person who could help me think it through. If there's one thing I'd tell my younger self is say it out loud sooner. Talk to a friend, a therapist, a coach, or anyone that you trust. The story gets smaller the moment you stop carrying it alone. If you take nothing else from today's episode, take this. The crack doesn't mean you failed. It means something is asking to be rebuilt, and you get to choose when you start. It doesn't have to wait until it's full collapse. If any part of today's episode hit close to home, if you're in the middle of your own pivot right now and you're not sure what the next right step is, I put together something that might help. It's called the Reinvention Starter Guide, and it's free. No catch, no long form to fill out. It's just a starting point, something to help you to take the first small step instead of freezing. You can grab it at the dianastaleyshow.com website. And while you're there, you can also find my book, The Courage to Start Over, and the Reinvention Workbook, if you want to go deeper than a single episode can take you. I built all of it for exactly this moment, not the big dramatic reinvention, but the quiet one, the one you're maybe sitting in right now. So today was a detour, not a dead end. We have a special guest coming in next week, and I will announce that over the next few days. Thanks for being here with me today. Even in the unplanned version of this show, if today's episode meant something to you, share it with someone who needs it right now. Until next time, this is Diana Staley, and this is the Reinvention Room.
This is the Reinvention Room, where the endings make way for something new. Every heartbreak turning into truth. The next act is always the best one.